Time tourism was the latest frontier in luxury vacations. No longer content with tropical beaches or mountaintop chalets, the ultra-rich now hopped between centuries to experience the past, or sometimes future, firsthand. One such traveler was Celia Radcliffe, a driven and adventurous woman who believed that boundaries existed only for those too timid to break them. Bold, charismatic, and sometimes reckless, Celia was about to embark on a series of jumps to eras that would test her nerves, her morals, and her very identity. Chapter 1. Departure from the Present. Celia strode through the polished glass doors of Tempest Adventures, the leading time-travel tourism company. The lobby hummed with the gentle whir of the quantum stabilizers hidden deep below the building. On either side of the high-ceilinged corridor, LED screens advertised journeys to the Jurassic period, Cleopatra's Court, medieval Europe, each a unique slice of history served up on a silver platter. Her reflection in the glass showcased a tall, self-assured woman in her early 30s. Dressed in a sleek black coat, Celia carried with her a single duffel bag containing carefully selected modern necessities and the recommended period-accurate outfits.
"Good morning, Ms. Radcliffe,"
said a polite but somewhat anxious representative named Thomas. He offered a slight bow, an old-fashioned gesture, ironically enough.
"Your final briefing is waiting in Conference Room E. Shall we?"
Celia flashed her trademark smile, confident and perhaps a touch arrogant.
Lead the way, Thomas.
In the conference room, a half-dozen time-travel specialists, known as chrono guides, stood beside a large cylindrical machine that was reminiscent of a gleaming metal vault. Dr. Imogen Barlow, the head of time navigation, stepped forward and shook Celia's hand.
"We finalized your itinerary,"
Dr. Barlow said, handing Celia a glossy brochure emblazoned with the Tempest Adventures logo.
"Are you ready for the journey of your life?"
Born ready,
Celia quipped, scanning the itinerary. She saw the meticulously planned schedule for 3 time jumps: Victorian London, 1851, the year of the Great Exhibition; the Jurassic period, a carefully regulated dinosaur safari location; Chicago, 1893, the world's Columbian Exposition, an era of rapid innovation and world fairs. A hush fell over the room as Celia stepped onto a raised platform. Dr. Barlow pressed a series of glowing icons on a control panel. Slowly, Celia placed a small, disc-shaped device called a chrono beacon on her wrist, ensuring the clasp was secure. It would help Tempest Adventures track her location across timelines and bring her back if things went wrong. Her heart raced with anticipation. Time to begin. Chapter 2. Victorian London, 1851. A dizzying swirl of lights and a sensation like free-falling gripped Celia for a moment. Then it stopped. She opened her eyes to see grey skies, cobblestone streets, and a swirl of damp air that smelled faintly of soot and horse manure. She was in Victorian London. Celia had arrived near the Crystal Palace, where the Great Exhibition was in full swing. Crowds of men in frock coats and women in elaborate gowns chattered excitedly about the wonders displayed inside. Machinery from the Industrial Revolution, exotic goods from across the British Empire, and the marvels of the modern world, as it existed in 1851. Quickly, Celia slipped behind a row of carriages to swap her modern coat for a simple but elegant Victorian dress, thanks to Tempest Adventures' suggestions. She'd practiced lacing up a corset, but it still felt restrictive. Undeterred, she pinned up her hair, placed a small bonnet atop her curls, and emerged, ready to blend in. Her first stop was the Crystal Palace's main hall. Tall glass and ironwork soared overhead. The structure resembled a massive greenhouse filled with the best of 19th-century innovations. Intricate steam engines, telegraph prototypes, and demonstration models of a calculating machine lined the displays. Celia strolled through the exhibits, dazzled, though her modern perspective made her snicker at the fuss people made over what seemed basic to her. An overconfidence welled up inside her.
They'd lose their minds if they saw a smartphone.
She thought, smirking. She found herself weaving through aristocrats and foreign dignitaries, not the least bit intimidated. She was bold enough to strike up conversation with an elderly gentleman examining a scale model of a steamship.
Marvelous, isn't it?
The man said, turning to face Celia. His face was framed by a white beard, meticulously trimmed.
I suppose,
Celia replied, half a grin curling on her lips.
though I've seen wonders even more incredible.
Oh,
The man raised an eyebrow.
you must be quite the traveler to find the great exhibition underwhelming.
She nodded, exuding bravado.
I've come from far, far away.
She said truthfully, if not entirely candidly. The gentleman introduced himself as Sir Erasmus Pierce, an inventor and sponsor of an exhibit showcasing locomotive designs. He invited her to a small gathering that evening at his townhouse. Eager to see Victorian high society up close, and if she were honest, to show off, Celia graciously accepted. At the townhouse party, gaslit chandeliers glowed above ladies in satin gowns and men with stiff collars. Celia made small talk with industrialists and philanthropists, sprinkling in vague references to places she'd traveled. She carefully avoided direct mention of the future, but her sly words and confident tone left many enthralled. As the evening wore on, Sir Erasmus grew more curious about her.
My dear,
He said,
you speak with such authority on the wonders of tomorrow. I dare say you'll reshape our world if you share even a fraction of your knowledge with us.
Something in his tone made Celia realize she'd gone a step too far. She had been bragging about certain possible inventions that would solve London's sewage problems, lighten the burden of household chores, or even harness electricity in unprecedented ways. Sir Erasmus was no fool. He recognized she was either a visionary or something else entirely. Celia stood up from the parlor sofa, mask of confidence still firmly in place.
I must be going.
She said.
Another engagement.
Of course.
Sir Erasmus studied her carefully.
I've never met anyone like you, Miss Radcliffe. I do hope we'll meet again under more forthcoming circumstances.
Though her illusions of grandeur were still intact, a hint of unease bubbled in Celia's stomach as she left. She had meddled, if only slightly, and she knew the protocols, never influenced the timeline. Dr. Barlow's training echoed in her mind. But in the cool London air, her self-assurance returned. No real harm done, she told herself. Tomorrow, she'd head home, or rather, back to Tempest Adventures' timeline, before leaving on her next jump. She activated her chrono beacon, disappearing in a swirl of shimmering light, leaving behind a world that remained blissfully ignorant of her true nature. Chapter 3. Into the Jurassic. Materializing again in the sterile corridor of Tempest Adventures, Celia wasted no time. She quickly checked in with the staff, assured them that all was well, then went straight to the docking bay for her next scheduled stop, the Jurassic period. Time tourism to the dinosaur age was highly regulated for good reason. The slightest change could ripple through millions of years, potentially altering the course of evolution. Tempest Adventures maintained a secure bubble, a designated safari zone that was presumably less delicate for the future timeline. Tourists could watch colossal dinosaurs from protective platforms or even join short guided treks, though strictly supervised. Celia boarded an egg-shaped time capsule with a group of 5 other tourists. She recognized their wide-eyed excitement, but was more interested in grabbing the prime seat. Front row, tinted glass view. Once they jumped, the shift was immediate. A dense, humid forest of giant ferns and towering conifers rolled out like an alien planet. The air smelled of wet earth and vegetation on steroids. Their local guide, Keiko, a professional with a sturdy build and a calm demeanor, handed out specialized gear.
Welcome to the Jurassic. Check your oxygen filters and keep your noise levels low. We'll begin at the observation platform, then take a short trek. Stay with the group. Any deviation can be dangerous for you in the timeline.
Celia yawned, a show of her cocky boredom.
I've been waiting for something thrilling. Let's see some apex predators.
Keiko gave her a measured look.
Respect the environment, Ms. Radcliffe. This is not a theme park.
They set off, treading carefully on a narrow wooden boardwalk that had been discreetly built by Tempest Adventures. Soon, they reached a vantage point overlooking a valley. There, 2 sauropods, massive long-necked giants, grazed placidly. Their scale was breathtaking, even to someone from a highly advanced future. Celia couldn't help but be awed, at least for a moment. But she wanted more. When word came that a pair of Allosaurus had been spotted near a watering hole, Celia urged the group to head that way. Keiko hesitated, noting the area's unpredictability. Another guard insisted the route was marked as high caution, but Celia's charisma and impatience swayed the other tourists, who clamored for a closer look. The guides reluctantly agreed, leading them to a vantage point near the water. Crouching low, they peered through thick fronds at 2 Allosaurus, sleek, predatory theropods about half the size of the later T-Rex, but no less formidable in their domain. The predators lapped at the water, their black eyes watchful. Celia's heart pounded. She was overwhelmed by primal fear and a burning desire to see them up close. She stepped forward, just a little, for a better view. A twig snapped under her foot. One of the Allosaurus raised its head, sniffing the air. Keiko motioned for her to back up, slowly, silently. Celia obeyed, at first. Then, her foot caught on a knotted root, and she stumbled, letting out a small yelp. The Allosaurus roared, pivoting towards the group. In seconds, the other tourists scattered, their attempt at stealth shattered.
Stay together!
Keiko shouted, raising a tranquilizer weapon. But it was too late. The first Allosaurus charged. The ground shook with each step. A second guide tried to fire a sedation dart, but missed. In the commotion, Celia found herself sprinting back along the boardwalk. She could almost feel the predator's hot breath on her neck. Her illusions of invincibility were snapped in an instant.
I am going to die.
She thought, heart pounding. She threw herself behind a boulder as the massive dinosaur thundered past, chasing the rest of the group. Screams, roars, frantic footsteps filled the air. Eventually, the sedation gun found its mark. The Allosaurus let out a final snarl before slumping to the ground, breathing heavily but immobilized. The second Allosaurus had retreated at the commotion. The group regrouped, shaking and panting, but miraculously unhurt, except for one tourist who'd twisted his ankle. Keiko's usually calm face was twisted in fury.
That was reckless, Ms. Radcliffe. You nearly got us all killed.
Celia trembled, a cold sweat covering her forehead. This near-death experience jolted her pride like a lightning strike. She wasn't unstoppable. She could die, or worse, cause irreparable damage to the timeline and others' lives. As they returned to the time capsule, Celia stayed silent, avoiding everyone's gaze. She found herself replaying every foolish step that had led to that moment of terror. Within the hour, she was back in the present day at Tempest Adventures facility. She hurried to the debriefing station, where Dr. Barlow, having already heard the incident report, raised a stern eyebrow.
We'll discuss this after your final jump.
She said coolly.
Get some rest. Think about what happened. We can't have another mishap.
Chapter 4. The World's Columbian Exposition, 1893. Despite the scolding, Celia decided to complete her last scheduled jump. Chicago, 1893, home of the World's Columbian Exposition. It was famous for its dazzling showcase of architecture, technology, and entertainment, sometimes called the White City. She had intended this trip to be a casual finale, a chance to enjoy historical carnival rides and marvel at how the fair introduced such innovations as the Ferris wheel and widespread electric lighting. But her near tragedy in the Jurassic era weighed heavily on her mind. This time, she promised herself, she would observe the guidelines more closely. The moment she arrived in 1893, she was assaulted by the bustle of the fairgrounds. Towering white structures lined the avenues, elaborate facades glimmering in the sunlight. Attendees from around the world wandered in ruffled dresses and smart suits, sampling new foods, like the newly popular crisped rice cereal or a certain brand of chewing gum, and marveling at the wonders of modern engineering. Celia checked a small, period-appropriate bag to ensure her chrono beacon was still in place, hidden beneath a folded shawl. Then she adjusted her day dress, less restrictive than Victorian London's, and stepped into the expo. The crowd was thick. She passed pavilions showcasing everything from moving pictures to exotic wildlife. A swirl of orchestral music floated in the summer air, blending with the calls of vendors hawking everything from postcards to souvenirs. For all its glamour, the fair was also a microcosm of social classes, wealthy industrialists rubbing shoulders with curious working folk. Street performers and pickpockets alike found easy targets in the throngs. She decided to begin at the Electricity Building, which displayed the miracles of the modern age, courtesy of scientists like Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison. Celia drifted among the exhibits, reminding herself to stay modest, to keep her modern knowledge discreet. Yet she couldn't help feeling a twinge of excitement at seeing these technologies in progress. Within the exhibit, a demonstration of Tesla's alternating current system drew a crowd. There stood Nikola Tesla himself, tall, slender, with a sharp mustache, showing how AC current could power light bulbs wirelessly at short range. Applause followed each spark of visible electricity. Celia found herself clapping a bit too enthusiastically. Tesla's eyes flickered over the audience. He nodded in acknowledgement, then politely carried on. Part of her itched to speak to him, to glean a closer insight. But she recalled the fiasco with Sir Erasmus in 1851 and the near-fatal experience in the Jurassic. She took a deep breath, stepping back to observe from a cautious distance. No messing with the timeline, she told herself. Yet fate had other plans. As Celia turned, she noticed a street urchin weaving through the crowd. He was small, maybe 10 years old, clothes threadbare. He darted close, snatching a wallet from an unsuspecting onlooker. Quickly, the boy vanished into the throng with surprising agility. The victim, an older man, patted his pocket frantically, but never figured out what happened. Celia's first instinct was to chase after the boy. She'd seen too much suffering as a child in her own time to ignore a pickpocket. Perhaps she could stop him, or at least reason with him. She pushed her way through the crowd, following the glimpses of his ragged cap. She finally cornered the boy behind a large shipping crate near a service entrance to the building. He rummaged through the stolen wallet, retrieving a few dollars and some coins.
Hey,
Celia called softly, hands raised in a peaceful gesture.
don't run. I'm not here to hurt you.
The boy froze, terrified. He made a weak attempt to hide the wallet behind his back.
I'm sorry.
He stammered.
I just need money. My family.
Celia's heart clenched. She remembered her own childhood hardships, far more comfortable than this boy's life, but still laced with challenges. She crouched down so she was eye level.
What's your name?
Jimmy,
He whispered.
my dad lost his job at the stockyards. I just wanted to buy some bread.
A wave of compassion hit her. Could she step in, change his fate? The rules hammered into her mind. Do not interfere. Even small changes can create big waves. But was giving a starving child some money truly the same level of disruption as giving Victorians a blueprint for electricity or meddling with dinosaurs? Celia sighed. She rummaged through her bag. She had some authentic late 19th century currency provided by Tempest Adventures for small purchases. She handed Jimmy a few bills.
Return the wallet to that man. If you do, you can keep this.
She paused.
Make sure you buy food, okay?
Jimmy stared at the money, eyes wide with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief.
You ain't gonna tell the cops?
Not if you promise me you'll do the right thing.
Celia said, her voice earnest. He nodded fiercely, tears in his eyes. With that, the boy darted off, hopefully to return the wallet. Celia stood there a moment, absorbing the wave of humility that decision brought. She had changed something, but maybe, she hoped, it was for the better. Walking out from behind the crates, she bumped right into the older man whose wallet had been stolen. He clutched it in his hand, relief flooding his face.
A young lad just returned my wallet, said he found it.
He looked at Celia.
I suspect you had something to do with that. Thank you.
She simply nodded.
I'm just glad everything's all right.
She murmured, her voice subdued. The man left, praising her as an angel of mercy. Celia didn't feel angelic. She felt human, more aware of how fragile time and destiny were. Realizing she'd had enough meddling, enough risk-taking, she decided it was time to leave. Chapter 5. A Humbled Return. When Celia returned to the present, Dr. Barlow and a small group of time tourism officials awaited her. She braced for a reprimand regarding the dinosaur fiasco. Instead, Dr. Barlow offered a measured look of concern.
How was Chicago?
She asked, crossing her arms. Celia exhaled. Eventful, she replied.
And educational.
Dr. Barlow nodded, her eyes glinting.
Care to elaborate?
Celia recounted her entire journey. The subtle bragging in Victorian London, the near-fatal run-in with the Allosaurus, and the incident with the pickpocket in Chicago. For once, she described her actions with honesty, not bravado.
I realize now,
She concluded, voice trembling slightly.
time travel isn't just a thrill ride. It's something that demands respect, humility. One misstep can ruin everything, for me or for countless others.
She paused, forcing herself to say the words.
I'm sorry.
For a moment, Dr. Barlow studied her. Then she gestured for Celia to follow her into a private office.
I see that you've learned something. Perhaps the most valuable lesson for a time traveler. We are guests in other eras. Our presence, our choices, can ripple out in ways we can't predict.
Celia nodded. The overconfident spark in her eyes had softened to a quieter determination.
In that sense,
Dr. Barlow continued.
You have a certain responsibility now. You've experienced the depths of these consequences firsthand. If you still want to be part of time tourism, we can use travelers who respect that burden. If not, well, I understand.
A wave of relief and responsibility washed over Celia. She realized that for all her recklessness, she had stumbled onto a passion that was bigger than herself.
I do want it,
She said softly.
but differently this time.
Dr. Barlow offered a half smile.
Then, welcome back, Ms. Radcliffe. Let's ensure the next journey is safer for everyone.
Epilogue. Late that night, long after Celia's final debriefing, she sat alone in her apartment. She thumbed through the photos she'd discreetly taken. Sketches of the Victorian dresses, glimpses of the dinosaur safari from a safe vantage point, and the bright lights of the 1893 Chicago Expo. It felt surreal, like flipping through postcards from 3 lifetimes. Her heart tightened at the memory of the Allosaurus chase, that primal terror that nearly ended her life. She thought of Jimmy, the frightened pickpocket, whose fate she'd hopefully nudged towards something better. For the first time in her entire life, Celia understood that her actions, her presence, left marks on people and places, not just in her own era, but in eras that shaped the very fabric of her present. She had always loved the thrill. Now she knew she must carry the responsibility. Outside her window, the city hummed with neon signs and busy streets. She wondered if someday she might run into the echoes of her own footprints in those distant times. Perhaps that was the real wonder of time travel, recognizing that every era, every second, was precious and fragile. And so, Celia Radcliffe, the once cocky time tourist, leaned back in her chair and gazed up at the stars. A small, genuine smile crept across her face, a smile tinged with humility and hope. The future of time tourism was open to her, but now she knew just how much care it required. As she set her eyes on the next horizon, she carried with her not just bold curiosity, but also the tempered wisdom that only comes from truly knowing how easily everything can be lost.